Hello and welcome to this recording about pre-2006 trusts. I'm Barbara Gardner from Technical Connection. During recent roundtables, I realized that so many of partners are so much younger that the year 2006, which is now 16 years ago, is a remote past, basically. And not many remember or even are aware of some important things that happened in year 2006 as far as trusts are concerned. So especially for those younger advisors who actually need to be aware of when the rules changed and how they changed for trusts in 2006, here's a brief refresher. Now, the important day to remember is 22nd of March 2006. This was a budget day in 2006, and it was at least a minor earthquake as far as taxation of trusts were concerned. This introduced what was referred to as an alignment of IHT treatment on trust. However, this was really a major revolution, not just an alignment. This is because taxation of, in particular, lifetime trust for IHT purposes changed completely. Now, specifically, we want to talk about trusts that were or are still offered by life offices and that are often used with investment bonds. Currently, just about any life office offering trust to be used with life policies and investment bonds will offer fully discretionary trusts. Until 22nd of March 2006, pretty much every trust that was used with bonds would have been a different kind of trust. It used to be called flexible trust, or to give it its full name, flexible power of appointment interest in possession trust. And interest in possession, of course, means that there is a beneficiary under trust who is entitled to trust income. Now you may ask, why were trusts used which granted right to income with bonds where actually not real income is ever produced? The reason for this was that this type of trust was treated very favorably for IHT purposes, namely gifts to interest in possession trusts, including flexible interest in possession trusts, were treated as potentially exempt transfers, i.e. pets. So effectively, a donor could invest £1 million in a bond subject to a flexible trust without any immediate IHT implications, because this was, and if they survived for 7 years, it was out of their estate for good. Of course, the trust assets would have been in the estate of the beneficiary entitled to income. However, as far as gifts were concerned, this worked fantastically, especially as, given the flexibility, where there were a class of potential beneficiaries in whose favor trustees could make appointments at their discretion, there wasn't much difference between this type of trust and fully discretionary trust for practical purposes. Of course, the difference was the point about interest in possession vesting in the beneficiary who was named. And of course, this meant that the trust assets were deemed to be the estate of the beneficiary so named. Now, after 22nd of March, if you created such a trust, and since then, obviously, a gift into a trust would be chargeable lifetime transfer, so anything in excess of nil rate band, which is £325,000 still, and not about to be increased in immediate future, would be a chargeable lifetime transfer subject to an immediate charge at 20%. So basically, an opportunity to make large gifts was taken away unless someone is prepared currently to make an absolute gift or gift to an absolute trust, or in some cases to certain trusts for disabled. Now, there is quite a lot of those trusts created before 2006, so many of your clients may have those existing trusts. And it is important to remember how these continue to be treated and what should and should not happen to these trusts in order to preserve, if that's what is desired, the current trust treatment. Basically, there was a window of opportunity to change the beneficiaries without tax implications until 5th of October 2008, but any subsequent changes to such trusts effectively terminate the pre-2006 treatment, which is referred to as transitional serial interest, and would bring the trust into the relevant property regime. So what could happen under a trust? If you wanted to change a beneficiary under the trust, that would mean that the existing IHT treatment would change, and you have potentially a problem with the relevant property regime, which means that from then on, the trust will be taxed as a discretionary trust. Exception to this if there is an appointment absolutely in favor of an beneficiary, because this would be treated as a pet from the existing beneficiary. Now, this means that if you actually want to take some money out of the trust and pay it absolutely to somebody else, that's possible without losing the transitional serial interest treatment, but that's the only occasion. So if you want to make an absolute appointment, fine, that would be a pet. Of course, then you need to tell the current beneficiary who is entitled to interest in possession that this is what's happening, because he will be treated as making a pet, which could have IHT implications if he dies within 7 years. What should never happen, however, is to change beneficiaries for no apparent reason and continue with the flexibility of the trust. So, for example, the settlor may say, well, I'm no longer happy that my grandson is the named beneficiary with right to income. I would rather change it to my granddaughter. If nothing else happens and the flexibility is retained, then the beneficiary who is disappointed will be treated as making a chargeable trust for HT purposes, as well as give to reservation of benefit if he still remains as a potential beneficiary. So there are all sorts of potential problems that could happen. So basically, if you have one of these trusts, or one of your clients have one of these trusts, you need to think very carefully about making any changes. Now, if you have clients with this trust and they may have bond investments with another office and they may consider reinvestment by itself is not going to cause any problem for IHT purposes. However, obviously, you need to look at all the other aspects of the trust, whether it is still needed, etc. Now, the one point about this trust is, as I said, they continue with the value of the trust fund being the estate of the beneficiary. Now, in some cases, actually, perhaps that may not be what people want, in which case they may just want to terminate the trust. So, as with all trust reviews, you need to look at what is the best option and what's the best course of action for the trustees. One other point I should like to make, that in relation to life insurance trusts or trust holding insurance policies, including bonds, there is an extra benefit in that premiums paid to such trusts, for example, under regular premium policies, can continue to be made under the old treatment. They will not cause the trust to lose its IHT treatment. Furthermore, if a beneficiary entitled to interest in possession, the default beneficiary, were to die, the death by itself will not mean that the change of beneficiary resulting from the death of the beneficiary will not mean that the trust will become a relevant property trust. So if a beneficiary who is entitled to interest in possession dies, that by itself will not make any difference, as long as the trustees then don't make another appointment in favor of somebody else. So that's all I have to tell you at the moment about pre-2006 flexible trust. Just be careful when you have clients with such trust before any decision is made what to do with the trust, as it could have unintended IHT consequences. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.